Picture this. You're alone in the woods, air's thick, silent. Every twig snap seems louder than it should. This episode asks, what if the monsters that scare us most aren't just threats in the dark, but stories we invent to help us face fears within ourselves? Previously, we've explored outdated school structures, productivity myths shaping our self-worth, and the algorithm that consumes us. Now, let's take a look at a new direction, into the woods. Here, I want to discuss something older than capitalism, older than burnout or time clocks. I want to talk about monsters. I'm not talking about your boss or your debt or your ex. I mean the real ones, or at least the ones that feel real. Throughout history, humans worldwide have shared stories of encounters with unexplained creatures. Bigfoot, Mothman, the Jersey Devil, Skinwalkers, the Wendigo, El Chupacabra, and the Loch Ness Monster. These are just some of the mysterious beings our ancestors described on quiet nights by the fire. These names are familiar for a reason. They're what people swore they saw when the night grew quiet or the forest felt alive. The more I study human behavior, the more I see we don't tell monster stories just for entertainment. We told them to survive. And honestly, we still rely on these stories today. They shape how we process our fears and understand ourselves. So, before we proceed, I'd like to invite you in. What's the monster you grew up hearing about? The ones that made you glance over your shoulders at night? Have you considered why, throughout all of history, we invent monsters? Let's start with the basics. Cryptids. Maybe real creatures haunting map edges. They're more than just folklore. They're mirrors of our deepest fears, reflecting hidden aspects that allow us to examine what we might not see otherwise. They show up everywhere. Indigenous oral traditions, medieval maps that say, "Here be dragon," modern forums discussing grainy photos, and your uncle still sleepless after what he saw in 1998. Even now, in a world where we carry Google in our pockets and we can watch Mars live, half of us still won't step into the woods alone after dark. Why is that? Why do we, hyper-rational, tech-savvy, modern humans, still whisper about tree-dwelling creatures? It matters because these stories reveal what lies beneath the surface of our species. Monster stories help us metabolize fear, giving shape to things we can't name. They are metaphors, letting us explore and confront societal fears and taboos indirectly by projecting onto creatures. We process emotions we're hesitant to face directly. Monsters aren't merely errors in thinking, they're our imagination's attempt to bring order to chaos. Through stories, we use monsters as stand-ins for the unknown, a way to address hidden fears. These narratives help us grapple with the unexplainable, regardless of background or identity. Monsters help us process complex emotions, transforming abstract fears into something tangible and relatable. They let us confront darker aspects of humanity or reinforce values by embodying the opposites. I came across this article where Professor Rachel Scoggins from Lander University shared a great example of this, which I really appreciated. She said the reptilian monster Godzilla, which terrorizes Tokyo, it's the embodiment of the fear that the Japanese people felt in the aftermath of World War II, following the atomic bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Tales of dragons found in Chinese, European, and Middle Eastern legends stretch far back and still fascinate us today. Pop culture explores our relationship with dragons in series like Game of Thrones, games like Skyrim, and anime like Spirited Away, just to name some of my favorites. Almost every culture has its monsters. Mesopotamia, for instance, has Humbaba and Tiamat. European traditions feature vampires and werewolves. Asia is home to creatures like the Japanese Kappa. The Americas boast legends like La Llorona, and Africa has the Tokolosh. And Middle Eastern ghoul tales are pretty prevalent. Why are these creatures so similar? It may come from our innate fear of certain animals. People may have discovered dinosaur bones and sought explanations for giant skeletons that had been unearthed. Tales of lair-dwelling creatures spark fear of the unknown and darkness. It's fascinating, isn't it? Every single culture has monsters. Indigenous tribes across North America, including the Cree, Ojibwe, and Navajo, share stories of supernatural entities, such as the Wendigo or the Skinwalkers, that possessed a serious threat and were to be avoided at all costs. These beings served as an important cultural function, warning others of the dangers possessed by the power of the spirit world. Navajo people warned of skinwalkers, shape-shifting witches turned animal. Healers known as medicine men helped others with good powers. These healers, sometimes turned evil, were referred to as Yi-na-lushi, or witches. These witches used their power for harm, transforming into animals such as wolves, coyotes, bears, crows, or foxes. They possess supernatural abilities, including speed, strength, mimicry, and mind control. They became skinwalkers by committing terrible acts, even killing family, to begin the witchery ways and master dark magic. When things go wrong, illness, unexplained death, or other misfortune, skinwalkers are often blamed for using dark magic to harm. Skinwalkers remain a topic online, with stories and videos circulating. A reality show called The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch claims that the Utah ranch is a site for UFOs, cattle mutilations, and strange creatures, supposedly home to many skinwalker encounters. I might dedicate a future episode to skinwalkers. They fascinate me. If you have any family stories about skinwalkers or any other monsters, I'd love to hear them, and I may share them in a future episode. So what really got me thinking about all these monsters, if I'm being completely transparent with you, is I recently started a job working overnights stocking shelves at a Cabela's. And if you're not familiar, it's owned by Bass Pro Shops and focuses on hunting, fishing, camping, and other outdoor activities. When you walk into one of these stores, you'll find taxidermy displayed of various animals throughout the entire store. So comparing a moose, a grizzly bear, and an elk, it got me wondering, are humans the only predators of these giant, huge animals? What if something bigger is lurking out there in the woods that would be a predator to us? Some people call it Sasquatch. Others call it the skunk ape. In the Himalayas, it's known as the abominable snowman, or Yeti. Today, I'm going to refer to it as Bigfoot. So the legend of Bigfoot, as we know it today, began in 1958. There's a journalist named Andrew Ginzoli of the Humboldt Times, and he shared a letter from a reader about loggers in Northern California who discovered mysteriously large footprints. "Maybe we have a relative to the abominable snowman of the Himalayas," Ginzoli wrote. He thought it would made for a great Sunday morning story, but to his surprise, readers were fascinated with what he wrote. In response to this, he and fellow journalist Betty Allen put up follow-up articles about the footprints and shared the name that loggers had given to this creature, which was Bigfoot. The legend was born. It evolved into a character in men's adventure magazines and inexpensive trade paperwork novels. In these stories, Bigfoot was always portrayed as a primal, dangerous, hairy, bipedal, and huge prehistoric monster that lurked in the wilderness. By the 1970s, pseudo-documentaries were investigating his existence, and films were portraying him as a predator. Then in the 1980s, he became associated with environmentalism and became a symbol of the wilderness preservation. I even have a sticker of Bigfoot that says "Leave No Trace," which I got on my last visit to Red River Gorge in Kentucky. You guys remember that really goofy movie from 1987 called Harry and the Hendersons? There's this monster that was portrayed as a friendly, misunderstood Chewbacca-like creature, and it needed protection from the family. There are grainy photos and videos on the internet of Bigfoot sightings, including Bigfoot footprints and trail cameras with trees snapped in half and saplings ripped out of the ground. Yet the footage never really shows a clear capture of the creature. We have cameras that can zoom in to see Saturn's rings, but somehow can't capture Bigfoot. Interesting. There's a cult following around this beast, and I used to work with one. For a while, I was a Culligan driver, delivering heavy filtration tanks in rural areas, and my trainer loved fishing, guns, and Bigfoot. And this guy could talk about Bigfoot lore and encounters and podcasts and shows for hours on end. He shared a personal story with me about a time when he heard this knocking sound from the trees in the woods behind his house one evening, and it gave him chills because he knew exactly what it was. Apparently, the Bigfoot creature knocks on trees to communicate distance from one another while they're out on their hunts, or it's a territorial warning. He shared that it let out a roar so loud and so startling that he almost shit himself. It didn't sound like anything he'd ever heard, and it was like a combination of a lion, a bear, and an elephant all mixed together. Now, all of these points point to a central truth. Monsters fascinate us because we invented them as tools to explore and manage our deepest fears. Whether real or imagined, these stories inspire obsession and community because they fulfill our needs to make sense of the unknown and confront what scares us. So, what needs or fears are we truly confronting? What truths are we facing when we invent our monsters? I had this encounter when I was a small child. I used to go to my dad's house on the weekends, and at the time, there was a lot of woods to explore and play in. And so one day, it was a little cooler outside, overcast, and a little windy, and I reached a point in the tree line where there was a sudden stillness. It was eerily calm, and so I stopped, looked around, and when I looked up, I saw this thing staring down at me. Or at least what seemed like it was staring down at me. It was clear and translucent. It was like looking through water. That shimmering, wavy look to it, but you can see what is behind it, only distorted. It knelt down on a tree branch about 15 feet up in the tree, hovering over me, and it was looking down. The only thing I've ever seen in my life that I can compare it to would be when the predator uses its camouflage to hide in the woods. That's a reference to a sci-fi classic. If you haven't seen it, what are you doing with your life? Or in the Fallout video game series, you can use these things called stealth boys, and you turn invisible. So my fellow gamers out there will know what I'm talking about. I looked at it for a moment, and I was stunned with curiosity. And then I looked around to see if anybody else nearby could, I could point at it and go, hey, do you also see that thing? And that moment changed something in me. It left me with questions that never quite left. And maybe in some way, it's why I'm drawn to these stories now. Then when I looked back up, it was gone without a sound or a trace that it was ever actually being there. So when I shared this story with my ex-coworker that loved Bigfoot, he was infatuated with the idea of these things, these translucent humanoid beings, which, by the way, is the only Google search I could plug to find a photographic depiction of what I saw that day. They were somehow related to Bigfoot in the sense that they were from the same place or possibly even were in charge of Bigfoot. I couldn't find anything out on the internet that enforced this theory, but he did share a podcast with me where a man shared his horrifying encounters with one that attacked him while on a camping trip. Normally, I would have written this off as a hoax, but there was a certain sincerity in the man's voice. he really believed what he was sharing in his story. Whether it actually happened, or he had a really bad psychedelic trip on drugs, or if he was just an excellent actor, it was convincing. I also found an entire website called soul_guidance.com, which features a section of people who's shared encounters with these translucent humanoid beings. Was my 8-year-old imagination just making something up to see an imaginary friend? Was it a secret military technology and a person wearing a stealth suit? Or was it an invisible predator-type creature from another world staring down at me that day? What did it want with me? It wasn't there to harm me, obviously, so whatever it was, perhaps it was studying me. Like all these years later, I'm caught studying it. And all of this somehow relates because someone wrote a news article in the late 1950s. Speaking of shared encounters, a small town in West Virginia is called Point Pleasant. Maybe you've heard of it. Experienced a collective trauma. On November 15th, 1966, two young couples reported to the police that they had seen a large black creature with glowing red eyes standing on the side of the road. It was described as a slender, muscular man about 7 feet tall with wings. However, they were unable to describe any of its facial features due to the hypnotic effect of its eyes. When the couple sped away, the creature flew after their car, making a screeching sound and pursued them for a considerable distance. Following this, more people reported similar sightings after the incident was covered in a newspaper. And I'm starting to notice a reoccurring theme here of monsters being reported in newspapers and then everybody else jumping on the bandwagon. One man even blamed his buzzing on his television and the disappearance of his German Shepherd on the monster. While I was reading about all this, I was curious why they didn't name it Owlman or the Vulture or something cool. The only lore I could find regarding naming of this creature is that the Batman TV series was really popular at the time, which also meant the comic books were at the forefront of the public's attention. One of the Batman's villains was named Killer Moth, who first appeared in Batman number 63, which was published in 1951, if anybody cares. Killer Moth inspired the name Mothman for use in local newspapers, and it stuck from there. December 15th, 1967, a year and a month to the day of the first sightings of Mothman, the Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed in seconds, taking the lives of 46 people. People started blaming the collapse on the Mothman after claims of sightings of it flying above the bridge right before its collapse. The reality of the collapse is that a very tiny microscopic crack in one of its eye bars developed over the course of 40 years due to stress and corrosion, eventually giving out that day. Today, Point Pleasant has become a tourist attraction due to the Mothman, and an annual Mothman festival has been held there since 2002. Each year, the festival attracts an estimated 10 to 12,000 people. They've even got this 12-foot statue of Mothman. You should Google it. It's actually pretty cool. Between 1966 and 1967, there were approximately 100 sightings in the Point Pleasant area. Since then, sightings have become increasingly rare, occurring about every couple of years. The last sighting I could actually track was in December of 2023. However, this was also on Reddit, so you've got to take that with a grain of salt. There's a really grainy iPhone picture on the post, but it honestly just looks like a bird in the sky to me. Then there's the Jersey Devil. Colonial folklore about curses, deformity, and the fear of wild places just beyond the farm. It's part moral lesson, part campfire therapy. The origin story of the Jersey Devil varies slightly, but the gist of it is this. 1735, colonial New Jersey. For reference, this is 40 years before the American Revolutionary War, where we fought Great Britain for our independence to become the United States of America. So a woman named Leeds had 12 kids. I'll give you a second to soak that in. Today we ask ourselves, who in their right mind could afford that, right? Back then, people didn't live as long, and death was a common occurrence. So people used to have more children because it meant more help around the house and farm. And also, there's a good possibility a few of them would succumb to deadly illness before reaching adulthood. So when Leeds found out she was pregnant with her 13th child, she was pretty over it. And she cursed her own child in frustration, declaring it, "Let this child be of the devil." The child was born normally, and then suddenly it grew wings and a tail and claws after birth, and it just got up and flew out the window. Some say the child transformed into a creature with hooves and a goat's head with bat wings and a forked tail. The demon snarled and screamed, beating everyone with its tail before flying up the chimney and heading out into the woods. In other versions, Leeds is actually a witch, and the dad of the kid is old Satan himself. Other versions say that local clergymen attempted to exorcise the demons in the woods, but anyway, the monster stays the same. The creature it's very similar across all these stories. There have been claims of sightings and occurrences ranging from it flying around a mill to livestock killings being blamed on the monster, and vigilante groups and hunters roamed the pines in search of the devil in the early 1900s. Yet no proof of such creature has ever been brought to light. The Philadelphia Zoo even put out a $10,000 reward for anyone who could bring it into captivity. There's this one guy, his name was Norman Jeffries, and he was a publicist for the Philadelphia Arc Street Museum. And this guy was known to be a hoaxer. And as a result, the museum was on the verge of closing. There was just not a lot of people visiting as frequently. And so Jeffries had this idea. He said, "I'm going to advertise we have a captive Jersey Devil." And that would bring in the crowds. That would everybody would come back to the Philadelphia Zoo, right? Well, this guy buys a kangaroo from an animal trainer, and he paints it, and then he glues fake claws and bat wings on it, and then he displays it as the Jersey Devil, as the captured, legendary, one and only Jersey Devil. And I guess if you've never seen a kangaroo before, it could be convincing. But yeah, I found that pretty interesting. I wanted to share with you guys. So the Jersey Devil is one of the more forgotten cryptid monsters. I don't hear of this one as much, but it has made its appearance in many pop culture creations. The X-Files, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, What We Do in the Shadows, Gravity Falls, Supernatural, and Fallout 76. There's also 2 professional hockey teams named after the Jersey Devil and a roller coaster at Six Flags. So there's one more monster I want to cover tonight. Even though there's been so many more I could talk about, I couldn't make a show talking about monsters without mentioning Old Nessie. The Loch Ness Monster. I'm sure you've heard of this one. I'm pretty sure everybody has heard of the Loch Ness Monster if you've not been living under a rock. It's the legendary mythical creature of Scottish folklore that is said to live in the Loch Ness in the Scottish Highlands. It's believed to resemble a giant sea serpent or underwater dragon, evoking the image of a prehistoric plesiosaur. There's this really grainy black and white photo. I'm sure you've seen it. It's from 1934, and it's claimed to be the first sighting of Nessie. But it looks like someone underwater with their arms sticking up out of the water and some other guy with a John boat snapping a photo with some old crappy camera. I imagine 2 drunk Scottish dudes at a pub coming up with a way to spook the whole town and stir up a ruckus over nothing. "Oi, I know what we all do." I know that was really bad. It's now been known that photo that I'm referring to is actually, it is a hoax. It's not real. The first written account was from a 565 AD biography of Saint Columba, who reported that a water monster attacked a man in the River Ness. There was a few sightings reported in the 19th century, but the best known article that garnered significant attention was published in 1933. For reference, this is right before World War II. The Inverness Courier published an article about a large beast or whale-like fish in the loch. A new road was built along Loch Ness, increasing public access, and as a result, more people began reporting sightings of the monster. Amateur investigators had kept searching for decades, and then in the 1960s, several British universities began conducting sonar expeditions of the lake. And although nothing was certain to be found, the sonar operator did detect some type of large moving underwater objects. In 1975, which was also the year the Vietnam War ended, another expedition combined sonar and underwater photography. After enhancing the photo, it appeared to have captured what looked like a giant flipper of an aquatic animal. Expeditions continued all through the 1980s and 90s, yet nothing conclusive was found. The area remains a tourist attraction to this day, and investigators continue to search for answers regarding the legendary Loch Ness Monster. Here's something I've noticed while going through all these. So let's pause for a second. What do you think so far? Do these stories remind you of anything from your own life or community? When social tension is on the rise, wars, economic crashes, pandemics, we've all, if you're listening to this, we've all experienced these, right? Monster sightings seem to spike. It's as if collectively, as a society, our energy is at a certain vibration, or when there is a level of increased chaos, however you want to look at it, we create monsters to have something that is seemingly worse than whatever it is that we are experiencing at that time. Yet, I don't think we realize we're doing it. It's like the collective unconscious starts scanning the tree line again, looking for a shape that it can hold our panic. We invent stories when reality stops feeling safe. When the edges of what we know start to crumble, we fill that darkness with spooky creatures. And it takes just one spark for something to take off. And then everybody else wants to latch onto it as truth. Then that makes me wonder about the power of the human mind. Because if we believe something, then it's real, right? If we want to believe something is true, then it becomes more real in our brain. And we start scanning for evidence, and it almost becomes like a form of amnesia. Here's where it gets philosophical. Monsters exist because humans desperately need somewhere to stash the excess emotional weight that we carry. Fear, uncertainty, the feeling that the universe is bigger and weirder than we can process, it all needs a container. We can't hold raw chaos in our bare hands, so we sculpt it into something with edges, something with a silhouette, something we can name. We take the shapeless unknown and give it teeth. Because once you can describe a thing, you can debate it, you can draw it, you can meme it. You can argue about it with strangers on Reddit at 2 a.m. while you pretend you're not avoiding your real life problems, and you can make it real. You give it power. That's the secret function of a monster. It turns cosmic level dread into something you can whisper about around a campfire. A monster is the unknown wearing a mask, but it's also a mask we made. And here's the twist. Monsters aren't just fear vaults. They're guardians of mystery. In a world where algorithms try to autocomplete our souls and every question has 6 million search results, monsters stand there like bouncers at the door of the unknowable, saying, "Relax, you don't get to figure everything out." They protect the last dimly lit corners of the map, the places that GPS doesn't bother with. And those corners matter. They keep us from drowning in certainty. They remind us that the universe still has locked rooms. Because mystery is not a glitch in the human experience. It's a nutrient. When everything is flattened into data points and dopamine loops, mystery becomes rebellion. It becomes oxygen. It keeps our imaginations from becoming brittle. Humans need that spark of maybe. We crave it. Because imagination is how we survive the parts of life that don't make sense. Imagination builds hope out of nothing. Hope is just a story we crave. Hope is just a story we choose to believe in before we have evidence to support it. So the real monster, it's not Bigfoot. It's not Loch Ness Monster or whatever lurks in the woods behind your cousin's house. The real monster is the belief that everything meaningful can be Googled, cataloged, debunked, and shrink-wrapped into a YouTube explainer. Monsters remind us that wonder still exists. Even if it sometimes growls, it is the last gentle warning from the universe that we haven't mapped the entire thing out yet. And maybe we never should. Here's what I think. Monsters aren't proof of the supernatural. They're proof that we're still awake inside. There's evidence of that pilot light of curiosity. It hasn't gone out. Even in a world that keeps trying to smother it under routines and metrics and whatever fresh nonsense the algorithm wants from us today, monsters say, hey, the human brain still refuses to be boxed in. Because no matter how many times life tries to compress us into predictable little input-output machines, our minds keep glitching in the direction of wonder. We start imagining shapes in the forest. We start whispering stories around fires. We start building creatures that stretch the walls of what's possible just a little farther than from yesterday. It's rebellion disguised as folklore. We create monsters to remind ourselves that the story isn't finished, the map isn't complete, and the universe hasn't told us everything yet, and maybe it never will. And then here's where it gets personal. The monsters we dream up aren't just external boogeymen. They're mirrors. They're reflections of the ones crawling around inside of us. The fears we don't say out loud. The questions we keep postponing. The itch for something bigger, stranger, more meaningful than whatever Tuesday has in store. Maybe Bigfoot never took a single step on this earth. Maybe Mothman has never perched on a bridge at midnight. But the fact that we keep searching for them, that we want to believe there's something lurking just past the tree line, it tells you something important. We're alive enough to look. We're not done evolving, not done wondering, not done peeking into the dark with nothing but a flashlight, a thudding heartbeat, and the ridiculous optimism that we might find something worth telling stories about. And that's kind of beautiful, isn't it? The act of searching, the restless curiosity, the need to shine a flashlight into the unknown. That's what keeps us moving forward. Not the monster itself, but the act of wanting there to be something more. Because where mystery exists, hope exists. Where the unknown lives, magic can still slip between the branches. And where magic hides, something is always calling us forward. Come see. That's the pulse of this whole show. This whole project, if you will. This whole weird human experience. Curiosity isn't a luxury. It's the thing that has kept our species moving, wondering, creating, surviving. It's the spark that refuses to die, even on our bleakest days. So, have you considered why we invent monsters? Maybe it's because monsters are proof that we're still human enough to wonder what's out there and brave enough to go find out. And every time we chase that wonder, we remember there's still a future worth walking into. Thanks so much for listening to Have You Considered? I'm your host, Reid. Suppose you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, I'm really grateful that you're on this trip with me. That was a lot of fun. I've had a fascination with monsters since I was little. Like, even before my encounter, I've just always been infatuated with creatures and sci-fi and monsters, and want to talk about that kind of stuff a little bit more on this show. So I'm definitely, probably, most likely, absolutely going to do an episode on each one of the monsters that I covered today, but in more depth. I think that would make for really cool videos too. I have a lot of ideas, and I just have so little time to execute them as I envision them in order to do them proper justice. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, consider sharing it with someone you know. Word of mouth is one of the best ways to support this show. You can check me out on YouTube and social media at dankopossums. It's where I share other parts of my life at. Stay safe out there. Maybe you have your own monsters you've been needing to confront, and if you do, I genuinely love to hear your stories. You can send them to dankpossums@gmail.com or reach out to me on social media. I'll leave all the information in the show notes below. I would love to share some listener encounters in future episodes, so don't be shy. I'll catch you on next week's episode. Bye.